Farmers usually do everything. At least in the 90s, we did everything. We did everything from rebuilding a building, pouring concrete, herding cattle, vaccinating. You did everything. You changed the oil on the equipment. That was my foundation. I respect that people in big cities, they don't necessarily have that option.
Welcome to the Blue Collar Blueprint podcast. With Blueprint, we are here to expose, teach, and educate you about blue collar career opportunities and things that'll help you getting started in a trade and once you're in that trade. If you want to learn a whole lot more, enroll in some of our free courses, head to our website at www.bluecollaredu.com. And with that being said, I'm the host, Austin, and today we have a guest, Mr. Gregory Martin. Mr. Martin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, Martin. So let's tell the audience who you are, where you come from, and just what you do in the construction or in the blue collar industry.
So, my name is Greg Martin, and I was born here in the Gettysburg area of Pennsylvania. So, that area is pretty rural. We live here in Lancaster now, but it's a lot of farms, so to speak, and of course, a lot of the trades are here. And on that note, when you grow up in a place, you think everything is like that. I ran into someone through LinkedIn connection, and they complimented this area on the work ethic and the craftsmanship of this area. And I didn't know. I took it for granted. So it also helped me when I was thinking back over my experience to really appreciate all the good people that I got involved with.
No, yeah. So hop into it. I know that you told me previously on a phone call. We chatted a little bit, and you talked about how you got started farming because you grew up in kind of a farming, rural area, and then you kind of got into framing, do construction. Just kind of talk about where that process of you starting, farming, it was at a young age, and then up to the kind of where you're at now and how those things have kind of just led to one or the other and how that process worked for you.
So I didn't realize this about myself early on. I just, for whatever reason, I wanted to make some money. And I think I was a teenager. I'm pretty sure I was 12, 13 years old, maybe a little bit older, but I wasn't old enough to drive. And I wanted to make some money, and I was an only child. So I spent a lot of time by myself. When my parents had bought a place where they had some acreage, I was out. I roamed. Dad bought me an old Honda 110 three-wheeler, and I wore the tires off of that thing, just exploring, doing all kinds of stuff. Now, I'll say this too. I was brought up in a conservative background, and my parents didn't have a TV. For context, we would rent a TV usually around the holidays, and we'd watch movies. That was our holiday thing that we would do. So that was the only time that I had TV. And as I'm older now, thinking about that, I listened to the radio a lot. So again, my parents were conservative. They did a lot of stories on the radio. Also, we visited the library a lot. And in looking at how I process things, I was reflecting on that. Mom would always let me rent CD tape or cassettes at that time. And so I would listen to this stuff on the radio or on a tape recorder. And that was my, I guess, foundation for moving forward. But I wanted to make some money. And when they had moved to an area a little bit, it was up in York Springs, Pennsylvania, and there were some farms up there real close to where we lived, and they had made some connections and reached out to one of the farmers up there, and he said, "Hey, send him down." He was about a mile and a half away from the house, and send him down, and I'll put him to work. I want to say too that I also realized that we are in a different time than we were back then. Laws have changed. And with respect to farmers, they're some of the best, most gracious people that you're going to probably come in contact with. At least that's been my experience. And I took it for granted because when you're a kid, you just, everything that you have is just the way it is. And you think it's like that for everybody. But the gentleman in question, he took me in and put me to work. He had raised hogs and we did crops there on the farm. So he sold hay working there. Um, and so we were doing a lot of, raking hay. My first experience on equipment was raking hay because it is, or use it running a TED, which a TED is a piece of equipment you pull behind that after the hay's cut, after the grass is cut, it throws it out, lets it dry, and then you rake it all back up once it's dry into a windrow and then bale it. So those were my early days of work. And and picking rocks. I don't want to miss that step either. But picking rocks will challenge some of the thoughts that you have during a day. If you're out in the sun, you're just picking rocks in a field, throwing them in the back of a wagon, and then taking it to the fence row and dumping it off. Um, Again, when you're young, you don't really think why you're doing stuff or how you're doing stuff. One thing I wanted to say and encourage anyone that listened to this is be okay with not knowing because you don't know. You're just going to keep making steps forwards and figuring it out. And that served me very well. In any of the work that I've done, I've always been fortunate enough to be very curious and to ask a lot of questions. Sometimes I didn't ask enough questions, and that I learned that the hard way too. One time there on the first farm that I worked on, the farmer was backing a piece of equipment and it was a feed grinder. And for whatever reason, he had left the grain chute out, sticking out the back of the machine, and he couldn't see it because of the way the machine was. And I didn't know any better. So he's backing it in and I'm watching him and I'm, come on back. I don't know what he's doing as a dumb kid. And he backed it up until the auger hit the building. And he followed and, well, why'd you let me do that? I didn't know. I thought you wanted it like that. So there's opportunities, especially depending on what age you are. There's opportunities. If you're not 100% sure, don't be embarrassed. Just ask. Just ask and clarify. Do you want this shoot out? I'm assuming it's out because something that I took for granted, even working in my own business for myself, I just assumed everybody else was on the same page, and they're not always like they're not always there, especially the younger crowd.
Yeah, to hit on that point, Gregory, that's in the lineman trade. Assume we always had the term assumption, assuming kills because I can't assume, let's say we're working a couple crews, I'm on a crew and we have another crew down the road. I can't assume that crew down the road, maybe they're a mile down the road, that they have completed their work and I'm just good to re-energize the line. Like you can't assume anything. Like we're very key. Like communication is probably one of the biggest and most important skills that anyone could have, whether you're getting started in a trade or you're in a trade in the beginning stages, or you've been in really any business or industry. Communication is so important. Asking questions, not assuming, just being able to communicate. You know, I see it with new apprentices and guys starting the lineman trade is if you're not asking questions to me or to the guys I'm working with, that kind of like is a cause for concern for me because now you're coming in, you're working. I don't know your background, I don't know your experience, so either I'm gonna assume that you know what you're doing because you're not asking any questions. So now you're having me assuming, and now you're having that guy not asking questions. Is just creates a whole kind of whirlwind of chaos. And so, yeah, to that point, communication and not assuming are probably two of the most important things for really anyone. So, Gregory, so from farming, you did farming for how many years? And then where did that lead you to next?
Well, like I said, I couldn't drive, when I started farming, and I had to take like an early on OSHA training, and I didn't know anything about OSHA at the time, but it was put on in those years back in the early '90s. It was put on through the local high schools, So I had to do that to get the ability to drive a piece of equipment on the road since I wasn't a family member. So I did that up until around 16. Mom and dad moved, and I took another position on a farm. Then with my license and with some experience, and um, worked there. I think until I was at least somewhere around 18. I think if it was before I turned 18 or around the time I turned 18 that I went into manufacturing. I worked for a company that makes potato chips here in Hanover, Pennsylvania, and I had to since I was farming. I want to say this too. I always thought that finishing school was really important, and it was just my understanding that's what everybody did. But I didn't thrive in the school atmosphere. Back to the whole listening to stories and stuff. If you had a good story, I was listening. I was engaged. After that, when it came to looking at books, I was just thinking about what I was going to do when I got home and got out of school. So that, from my part, was not a strength. It wasn't the best fit. And I still want to say too that I see value in that. I don't know what everybody's background is. I know there's a tremendous amount of encouragement to go to school and be well educated. I didn't function that way. I function better, back to what you were saying, in the trades, having conversations, asking questions, because I would refer to, at this point in my life, I would say that the trades are a watch and learn. You have to be engaged. Back to having the conversation. If you don't know what's happening, look, ask questions. Well, what are you doing? The guys that I grew up with, they were not maybe as good at communicating the way maybe some guys are today. And maybe it's just a guy thing. I don't know. I always communicated a lot. I spent a lot of time with my mom, and I gave credit to that because my dad was a truck driver, that my communication was abundant. So asking the questions, um, I wanted to get my hands dirty. I wanted to work with my hands. And that led me, when we moved to a neighborhood, and actually like a small neighborhood, which is the first time I'd ever been in one of those. And the neighbor worked for this potato chip company and said, "Hey, I could get you some work here. I see you're always around here. You're doing stuff. Would you be interested?" And so I went to work for them, and I had to get my GED before I did, because back to the whole school thing, I was so far behind, and it was my responsibility. I didn't pursue it. I wanted to work for whatever reason. I wanted to work with my hands. I wanted to do stuff, solve problems, and make things better. So I did. I got my GED and went right into, before the rest of my class graduated. I was already working that summer. And so I worked in manufacturing, which served me really well. Now, one thing that I didn't like or didn't appreciate was I was working second and third shift. That was the first time that I had ever done that. And it was inside. So that was a bit of a shift, because most of my work and my time, even by myself, was always outside, running around. I was in the outdoors, the weather. So it was a shift. It was a good thing, a good opportunity. And I worked around a lot of people, which was different. Like on a farm, the largest quantity of things that you're going to work around is probably cattle or turkeys or livestock, put it that way. But I worked around a lot of people, and so I got to see, at that point in my life, a number of different personalities and a number of different, thought processes through the people that I worked with, interacted with. One thing I would say about anybody who's getting in there, but be curious. Just always be curious and keep that open. Um, Probably to what you had mentioned earlier is, since everybody has a phone on them, it's kind of always been on purpose. I leave the phone in the truck, which can frustrate people because I'm not as readily available. When I'm working, I'm focused on that. I'm having conversations, I'm having fun, while I'm working, but I don't have the phone with me unless I really am expecting a call, or something comes up that I have to go get the phone. So just putting that out there to the watch and learn. You got to be watching. And for me, I'm easily distracted, and the phone can do that. So I have to leave it in the truck. That's just been my experience.
Yeah, no, Gregory, that's another extremely valuable point that you make is this day and age, especially younger adults getting into a trade or just getting it even to the workforce, into the industries, is that the phone, man, we have this thing all the time and we're so used to having it in our pocket. And every time I buzz, there's you checking your phone all the time. So I got in the habit too, and it's a good habit, like you're saying. For the most part, it's good from my perception. If I'm at work, I just started leaving my phone in the truck or in my lunchbox. I I relatively should not need this. If I'm out on the job site working, I shouldn't need my phone at all out there. If it's an emergency, someone will get a hold of me somehow. They will call my foreman, and my foreman always has his phone on him, or they'll get a hold of somebody that can that can talk to me. So other than that, there's nothing really much more going on that I need to have my phone on me, unless I'm, like I said, unless it's some sort of emergency, something, your grandfather died or whatever the case may be, that sort of information. But for the most part, leaving your phone in your truck, in your lunchbox, not in your pocket, is a great habit to get into, especially starting out in a trade. Just don't get in the habit of being on your phone at all. So that's a very valuable point. So Gregory, let's just get a little timeline of, so you started farming when you're 12 or 13. How long did you farm for? And then you said you got your GED. So when did you drop out of high school, and at what age, what grade? And then you got into manufacturing. What does that timeline look at? So you start at 12 of farming, you farm till when? And then from there you went to manufacturing. What does that timeline look
I
like?
stayed until in school, in the school system that I was in, which was, I'll say this too, was a private education. It was in the basement of our church. Coming from the conservative background, that's the way they did things. We were in a basement of a church, 60 kids from first grade to 12th grade. So there might have been 4 or 5 in the graduating class. And I was in there till at least 16 because I drove to, I think, my first trip to school. It snowed and I had an accident. So I know I was in school at least till I was 16, probably close to 17. Um, but being that I had worked all summer on the jobs, on the farms, when it was done, I was done with school. I'd get out, I'd go right to the farm and work. I had things that I wanted to do. So my school never got done. And I just got behind. And then somewhere along the line, I was so persistent with that, and I was so far behind. Mom and Dad didn't really want to take time, didn't have the time to fool with it and push it for me to get it done, or I ignored it. So they were like, somehow, I think Dad signed me out and said, we'll let you get out. You can do a homeschool program or something. And that never took root. It just didn't happen because if I wasn't outside, I wasn't working. I wasn't playing outside and exploring and doing my own thing. I wasn't doing school. I mean, I was either sleeping or eating, one of the two. But so to get my GED, I think I started that when I started looking at going to work for this company that was outside of people that I knew. And I knew that I needed to get a GED. And I think that was one of the requests that my mom had said was at least get your GED. Okay. So I started that process at a local high school and started studying. I didn't put a lot of time into it. I can assure you of that. Um, and then I had went to the interview for the potato chip company, and they're like, "We'd like to see you have your GED." Fine. So I was already in the process, but I got that, passed that, and then started work before my class graduated. So I would say somewhere around the 18, because my birthday was in the beginning of the year. So I'm thinking it was my 18th birthday that I would have been working, yeah, working out in the manufacturing, had my GED, and then I went to after I was working, I went to the graduation for our class, and they still just the way it worked, they still had to go get their GED because our school didn't offer the state certified diploma. So they still had to go get it, and I was already working and I counted that. And don't get me wrong, these guys that I grew up with, they worked summer jobs. That was just what we did. They had family, they had friends, they'd work for on farms. Everybody that I grew up around, we worked on farms, whoever it was. So we didn't own any farms. My parents didn't own a property, but we worked on farms. And it wasn't until, interestingly enough, I'll add this in here, it wasn't until I got into commercial construction in my 20s that we took OSHA courses and got OSHA certified. And I started to look at like what they were saying. I'm like, we did a lot of things in my younger years that I shouldn't have done. I just should not have. But I didn't know any better. We just did it that way. And on the topic of farming, farmers usually do everything. At least in the 90s, we did everything. We did everything from rebuilding a building, pouring concrete, herding cattle, vaccinating. We did the second farm in particular had turkeys on it. The first farm had hogs on it, and that was a part of the lifestyle. Is you did everything. You changed the oil on the equipment. That was my foundation. I respect that people in big cities they don't necessarily have that option. What I will say though is there are small shops that are willing to, if you're curious and you can approach them in a curious manner, they're willing to get you to do something just to get your hands dirty. And I really think that there's a lot of potential that the people that don't necessarily want to sit in school all day might be considered rammy or might be considered rambunctious, so to speak, dating myself with those words, but they might be better working with their hands and to encourage those guys, those women, whoever they may be, ask for opportunities because it's there. Um, Again, back to the phone thing. If I get too focused on the phone, I realize at this point in my life that opportunity passes me by because I'm focused on the phone. So just putting that out there for whoever picks that up, it's not going to reach a lot of people, but it'll reach enough people hopefully that they'll say, wait a minute, maybe if I could put the phone down, I'll be able to look up and look around and see opportunities that are out there and step in. Just be curious and step in and ask because it's always I've never had trouble finding work. I'll put it that way. I've never had trouble finding people that'll give you a chance. Just take a chance on you.
Right. And that the other thing is the phone also has a lot of opportunities on it. I mean, if you live in a bigger city or by a bigger city, I mean, there's always construction going on. There's always things going on. And honestly, all it takes is either to call one of these companies or just show up to the job site and ask to talk to one of the superintendents and ask them. That's how easy it can be. My girlfriend, that's she lived in Montana the last few years of her life. And that's how she wanted to do construction. She wanted to learn some construction stuff as a female, and so that's what she did. She literally called the biggest construction company in the area she was living and said, "Hey, I don't have any experience, but I want to, like, how do I become a laborer?" And then they're like, "When can you start?" And so she did a little interview thing, and then she literally started like the next day. So that's how easy it can be. And so with that, Gregor, I want to ask, how did you transition from the manufacturing into doing the was it commercial construction, or what kind of construction did you start doing?
Well, from the manufacturing, like I said, that was second and third shift, and that cut into dating and all my buddies. They didn't work second and third shift jobs, so I was careless with that opportunity, and I didn't take it seriously. I didn't have any complaints when I left. It wasn't anything like that, but I just didn't appreciate where I could have gone probably had I stayed there. So what I did was some of the other guys that I knew and would run around on the weekends with, they were building houses, framing. And so I said, hey, I'm going to leave here and I'm going to go work on framing. And I think I started that. And don't quote me on this because I've made mistakes before on this timeline. But I know I started around January. It was blitzing cold out, and it sticks in my mind that the guys played a trick on one of the older guys that were there, turned the saw blade around backwards when we started cutting plates to lay on the foundation. And they turned it around backwards. And he didn't have a lot of experience. He was actually an engineer for Caterpillar. I'm sorry, a machinist for Caterpillar. And Caterpillar in those years was on strike, if I remember correctly. So he came out and was working with us, and he didn't have experience, cutting wood. Some people would refer to that as a wood butcher because we're framers, we're not finished carpenters, and there's a difference. But they
Yeah.
turned the blade around and played a trick on him, and he was trying to cut that piece of board, and he laughed. I didn't know. We all laughed and thought it was funny, but it was really cold. And went from there, working in and just framing. And we framed again custom homes. We did a lot of them there in York County, the York County area mostly. So we framed everything. We framed the walls, exterior, framed the interior walls, put the deck on right on top of the concrete block. Back then, everything was block. I don't remember even doing many on poured foundations like they are today. And then we would frame the roof. We hand framed everything. Again, another experience that I didn't realize in the moment was teaching me skills that I took for granted because it was just something that you did. I know how to cut rafters. I'd probably still need a brush up at this point, but cutting rafters in was a skill because a lot of things now are done prefab. They're brought out in truss form, but we
Yep.
we sheeted it with sheeting and then tar papered it. And I don't know. I'll say it this way: being curious and working with good people, which I think some people would say salt of the earth people, we've always had a lot of fun. I mean,
Yeah.
and I want to
Yeah.
say this too because there might be at the onset there might be like, well, that's hard. And I would say it this way: that work is meant to be hard. It's just the way it is. But nobody's really working any harder than anybody else. You're going to have these days in the trades where it's hot. You're going to have days where it's cold. You're going to have days where it's uncomfortable. There's always an opportunity to recharge on a really crappy day. It always is. And it's not like you have to stand there for 8 or 10 hours. So, if someone who's getting new into the trades, there's always a respite, so to speak. You go out, you work for an hour or two, you warm up, whatever it may be, if it's cold or if it's hot. And also, something else that I'm reflecting on before this conversation is you will learn more about who you are as a person in the trades, because that's my background, I think, than anything else. Like you kind of figure out what you can and can't do. And if you're curious and you want to push yourself, that's a perfect opportunity to do it. I was thinking about people that I've seen on YouTube with regards to like working out and exercising. I don't think I exercised for many years into my 20s, late 20s before I started exercising because you know you're carrying lumber. We carried all of our lumber packages. When they came, the truck would dump them off. We would break them open, carry every stud, 5, 6 at a time, carry them in, carry every floor joist in, carry every sheet of plywood onto the deck. And I know that there was times when a deck would take almost 100 sheets of plywood. They were a bigger house to do that. So we carried everything. And that was just we had fun with it. I chose to have fun with it. Back to an influencer that I've heard say that life's either happening to you or for you. And in the moment, we just always had fun with it. I think it's in the nature of the blue collar work to have some fun, to carry on with each other. It's part of what builds camaraderie. And I think it's very important, especially on difficult jobs and difficult days, that you have that built and established with your coworkers. And you'll figure out fairly quickly who you can and who you can't, joke around with. And there's the right time too. And unfortunately, someone new getting into the trades, you're gonna do it wrong, and that's okay. Get comfortable being wrong, because
Yeah.
when you're comfortable being wrong, someone's always going to be able to say, "Hey, don't do that. Don't do it like that," and that's okay because they're trying to protect you.
Well, those are some awesome, awesome points, Gregory. That was almost like a closing out statement. Yeah, we are coming up on 30 minutes. So Gregory, we could talk about this stuff all day long, but I want to just get like your timeline. So you did the farming, you did the manufacturing, then you got into doing carpentry and framing. And then where did you go from there? I don't know, about what age you're at there until about now. So what does your experience look like? Because you have a lot of experience, and I think it's worth something to, let the people know, like, this is what I've done. Because these points you've been making, I've only been in the trades for, it'll about 8 9 years now, and everything you're talking about, it I'm like, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Everything you're saying makes sense to me. But it only makes sense to me because I've been in it for the last, 8 9 years. For those people who haven't experienced the trades, haven't worked in the trades, they just don't really understand this concept of like the brotherhood of working, being curious, working with your hands, and like that whole concept. So let's just share like your experience, so from farming to manufacturing to carpentry, and then where did you go from after carpentry? And then we can hit on some quick points about like what are the key three things that you learned from your experience of working in these different various trades.
Well, flashing back to the farm, they had tractor and trailer equipment to haul round bales to do different jobs, and so in the fields, here, get in the driver's seat, figure out how to drive this truck. So I had some grounding there in that. I went from building houses when it got really cold. I got like my fingers were cold, and I was like, there was times when I just got tired of it. So I started again out of curiosity, looking around. I'd stop at a business and ask questions. Are you hiring? Or I'd see a sign, and that took me to a trucking company, which helped me get which gave me um, a few months. I worked there for them on doing preventive maintenance on tractor and trailer equipment. And of course, I exited there. Then I didn't stick with that very long when it went to second or it went to third shift. And I'll say this too, I kept moving. I don't know why. I think there's people that would say that's a bad thing, but I always kept moving within the trades. So, rightly or wrongly so, that's also helped me get a lot of experience. When I went into commercial, I was in my 20s. I want to say close to 22, 23, maybe 21. And in there in the commercial field, I took a job there. And because I was curious, because I was asking questions, we were able to get in proximity to one of the owners over in York County, and that gentleman, he was the son of the original owner. He helped me get my Class A license. He let me drive a tanker truck and an old R model Mac around in the yard in the evenings to practice. So again, because I asked, I just went and asked, and I just, let's try the next thing. Let's move to the next thing. Um, so I went into commercial construction, and that was everything. That was coming out of the dirt all the way up to the roof. I was put with a superintendent, and that was his position, was to have me start in the dirt, digging ditches, shooting grades for the backhoe operator, tying rebar, pouring concrete, to setting piers, and then the steel workers came in, and I was a part of watching that process. I never worked as a steel and iron worker, but I was there a part of that process, setting when they set columns and set bar joists, and then that transferred into leaving that business. I went back to framing for a while, and ended up building pole buildings, post frame buildings. So the difference there is there's really no footer or foundation. They're just posts in the ground, and then the steel on the building. And then I got an opportunity to go back to work for a trucking company, a small trucking company, and they moved us upstate Pennsylvania, and I ran a business up there for them. And again, enthusiasm for what you're doing, curiosity opens doors. Being enthusiastic about it, just enjoying it, choosing to enjoy it, especially on the days when it's easy. Just enjoy it and pursue it and try something and ask questions. That's gotten me almost every opportunity that I've had. I nobody's Few people have asked me for some sort of certification other than OSHA certification. Do we need to go through the refresher course again? Few people have asked for my diploma. In fact, I don't think anybody's ever asked to see my diploma or my GED.
I have.
So that being said, going back to the trucking company, moving upstate, running a division for them up there, all was out of curiosity, all was out of enthusiasm. I exited there and I worked on wind turbines for Gamesa. They had a small farm at the time. It was 12 turbines at Mahanoy City, upstate Pennsylvania. So I put some time in there learning wind turbine maintenance. Worked with a really great crew of guys out of California, and that was just before 2008. Came back home 2009 because things just, well, 2007, and took a job with the same construction company, a different division, with as an oiler truck driver for a crane rental outfit. So I hauled counterweight because I had more truck driving experience by then. So I hauled counterweight, learned to signal, learned to rig, set up cranes. Like I said, they had everything from a 40-ton to a 500-ton at that time. And then 2008 happened, and everything just kind of came to a stop. And they're like, we gotta let you go because we don't have any work. Then I started my own business name, and I went around again with the same curiosity, knocking on doors, like, hey, that silo's in bad shape back there. Do you want to take it down? And it made sense for me to do that because scrap prices were up. Also, by that time, I had a family to start supporting, and I was married by then. So that would have been 28, maybe 29. I can't even off the cuff tell you. But we moved back down here, did that, worked for a couple of years on my own, and then got another opportunity in manufacturing as a truck driver and hauled oversized loads. And that moved us over here to Lancaster, hauled oversized and worked with the rigging department that they had as well, hauling stuff, rigging stuff. We set a lot of, in '08, we set a lot of modular homes that all tied in with the fact that I knew how the house was built. That was different process, but it was still all the groundwork. Um, and then recently, the most recent things I've done were, a lot of prep for concrete. We did a lot of flat work, stamped work, and the latest opportunity that I had was to do a lot of underground plumbing. So again, it's all like layers in the same. It's all layers in the same cake, so to speak. Once you're in the construction field, there's a lot of opportunities, but they all overlap each other, and you can segue fairly easily into different positions because you already have the background. At least
Yes.
that's been my experience.
Yes. Yeah, so with all your experience in all the different fields, I mean, because you have experience in so many different fields in the construction industry, what would be like top three? We've kind of hit on them throughout this discussion, but what would be your top three skills, or they could be soft skills or hard skills that someone could have or develop for getting started in a trade, whether that be construction, industrial, commercial, or really any blue collar trade?
I don't know a lot about the difference between soft and hard skills, other than what I would say is the trades will build self esteem and self confidence fairly quickly, especially when you're around good people and you keep that curious attitude and that willingness to take on more responsibility. You build self confidence out of that and self esteem. And I didn't even know that was a thing until recently, the last few years. So, with that self confidence and that self esteem going back, I think David Goggins says it. When he's in a tough situation, he reminds himself of the things that he's already done, and he builds on that. And he uses that as fuel to continue moving forward, to continue taking the next challenge. framing Framing was instrumental in learning how to use a tape measure, learning how to cut, learning when I look at a house, I know how the house is built because I've built it from the bones up. So looking at where the studs are, what the spacing is on studs, knowing how a roof is flashed, knowing how to put a roof on, whether it's a rolled roof or a shingle roof. You look at that. A lot of people don't have that, and they it leaves them a little bit maybe handicapped, you could say, because they just have no experience. But those things are you can walk into a piece of property and start looking around and go, oh wow, you'll see the whole piece of property differently. You'll see, from doing dirt work, you see grades, you'll see where the water is running where it shouldn't be running. Machinery operation is something that you build on as well. And I don't want anybody to think that I consider myself an operator. I can start and move any piece of equipment and run it. Operators spend a lot of time in a piece of equipment. They can hold grades for a couple 100 feet. If they're running a backhoe, they're smooth. I've got the opportunity to work around a Gradle operator who was putting um, topsoil around a brand new Chevy dealership at the time, and he didn't spill anything. Like he had spent so much time in there. He was so good. It was just like wow, and he made it look easy. And those are things that I would say pay attention to that because those guys have skills. Maybe that's what you would refer to as a hard skill, and unfortunately that takes seat time. That takes someone speaking into you. Like don't hold the sticks in fear. I've seen guys run cranes where they're white knuckling it the whole time. I've seen guys just running big equipment. I've had the privilege of working in Alexandria, Virginia. We did some work down there setting a precast sewage treatment tank down there. They spent a couple years, and the operator was running. I think at that time he was running a 500 ton, but you know just he just had a flow to him. And I've seen that in machine shops as well. When someone who has a skill, they have a flow to them that they've done it for so long. They don't need to torque every bolt. They can feel the machine. They could be nudging the machine. Um, those are things that I've always been really like excited me when it comes to the trades. I haven't spent a lot of time running CNC machines or anything, but when you see a guy that does it, it's pretty impressive to watch, especially running a piece of equipment.
All that stuff is that all that stuff comes with experience and like you're saying, seat time. So let's close this out. I want to think of like three soft skills. So a soft skill would be like curiosity, being able to show up on time. Like those would be some soft skills. What would be your top three soft skills that someone could develop or have getting started in a trade or the early stages into it?
Well, again, when you're young, it's easy to not appreciate getting there on time, getting there early. Just be there early. Be willing to make fun of yourself. Like, oh well, I messed that up because most of the time, guys, individuals in the trades, we have fun. That's part of having fun is making fun of yourself or making fun of the other guy lightheartedly. So be comfortable with that. It's not. I know. I remember in the beginning. Don't take it so personal. It's not
Yeah,
personal, especially when you're around a group of guys, and that's not easy for everybody. That takes time to, but and stay curious and ask questions and step up because there's always opportunity to step up and say, hey, I'll stay late. I'll go run for this. Let me help you figure this out on a Saturday. And anybody that I've had opportunities with always appreciated someone who was willing to come in on a Saturday and do the extra work, willing to run out on a Saturday, willing to take time, work a holiday, because that demonstrates to them that your curiosity is legitimate. Because I think there's probably people that can fake curiosity and just, oh, yeah, how you doing that, but actually showing up and being early and being on time, um, that kind of stuff leaves it says things without actually speaking, so to speak. And that will again continue to open doors for whoever it is that chooses to do that and pursue that field.
perfect. Well, Gregory, that was a great way to end finish this podcast out. I really appreciate you for coming on and spend the time and to share your experience and your knowledge of all the different many trades you've been in and been through. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for the opportunity. Anybody can get involved. Just take the time. It's not easy to change habits, but once you get around good people, then the good habits will come.
Perfect. All right. Well, for any of you guys listening or watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. If there's anything else you guys want to see or listen to, just comment down below and let me know. With that being said, with Blueprint, here to expose, teach, and educate you about blue collar career opportunities and things that'll help you in the skilled trades. And with that being said, I'll catch you on the next one.